See,
we are developing the road infrastructure. In the end of 24, it will be equivalent to the road infrastructure of USA.
We have now entered the growth phase. And I believe that the growth rate in India is going to be exponential.
Two narratives of Indian story which need to be brought center stage.
Hello and a very warm welcome. You are watching Race to Power, your one-stop destination for the latest from the world of politics. A show that tells you all that you need to know about the biggest electoral contests around the world. We break down the key political happenings, read between the lines, and dissect the developments to get you the bigger picture. Tonight, we start off by taking a closer look at the politics around issues related to farmers in India. What are the kind of promises being made by several political parties to woo the farmers, and how are they being perceived? We get to the lowdown. And from there, we move to Pakistan. A lot happening there. The race to power is only heating up. What lies ahead for Nawaz Sharif and Imran Khan, and what can the voters expect? What does the return of Nawaz Sharif mean for the country's political landscape? And what happened in court? We get to the latest. And from there, we move on to Spain as the socialists reach a government coalition deal with the hard-left Sumar party. We get you the bigger picture. All this and more coming up shortly. We are starting off with India. Our top story coming in from India, where the election season is underway. Top political parties are gearing up to face the litmus test in the state assembly polls. In Madhya Pradesh, Rajasthan, Chhattisgarh and Telangana, the spotlight is on the farmers and the issues that plague their agrarian economy. And as the race to power only heats up, let's take a closer look at the challenges that the farmers are facing in these poll-bound states and the various promises that India's political parties are making this time around. The biggest problem faced by the Indian farmers has been to do with the kind of issues on the ground. The biggest problem faced by Indian farmers is the debt trap. A significant number of farmers in the country taking loans, but often enough are unable to pay it back. And it is this singular feature that triggers high rates of farmer suicides. Let's just take a look at what the data really says. Farmer suicides in Madhya Pradesh increased by 35% in 2020. The data reveals at least one farmer committed suicide every 12 hours in the state. The suicide toll, in fact, went up to 735 farmers in 1 year alone. Rajasthan, the core farmer belt of North India, ranking 12th in terms of the number of suicides in the country. And in the year 2019, over 4,531 cases of farmer suicides were reported. Let's now move on to Chhattisgarh. The state ranked 6th as far as farmer suicides in the years 2019 and 2020 are concerned. And India's southern state of Telangana accounting for over 10% of the total number of farmer suicides in India. In fact, the percentage remained unchanged from 2017 to 2021. And ahead of the November elections in the states, the political parties are not fighting shy of making promises to a significant Indian vote bank, which is the farmers. From the incumbents to the rival opposition parties, the biggest concession that they are making to the farmers is the loan waiver. Top leaders across political lines have promised to waive off debts and loans taken by farmers, which they would have failed to pay over the years. But the question is the move only election motivated, or has the state leadership made such announcements in the past? Let's break it all down for you. Now, for Rajasthan, in the last 3 years, the state government has waived off loans worth over 409 crore rupees, and the decision affected over 59,000 farmers in the region. And in Madhya Pradesh, where 70% of the population is engaged in agricultural activities, the opposition has promised free power for irrigation systems to over 3.7 million farmers. And in Telangana, the ruling BRS party has promised 8,000 rupees per acre to every farmer to purchase farming inputs. The BRS also announced a scheme to compensate the families of the farmers who died of stress caused by crop loss due to natural calamities. The Congress party, in fact, has announced 15,000 annually to both farmers owning lands and the tenant farmers. And just last week, the central government announced a hike of 5.3% to 10.3% in minimum support price, or MSP, for the monsoon crops. This is the highest percentage jump granted by the government so far. And while loan waivers and financial aid for agricultural input is good news for India's farmers, a majority of these announcements have come in election years. And in August this year, the Telangana Chief Minister announced 19,000 crore rupees would be disbursed towards implementing the much-awaited loan waiver scheme. In Madhya Pradesh as well, the state government launched an interest waiver scheme in the month of May for 11 lakh farmers in the region. It is a similar story in poll-bound Chhattisgarh, where the Chief Minister asked the people to re-elect the Congress so that the party's government can write off loans of farmers like it did 5 years ago. Shifting focus for now to the United States. As if Ukraine was not enough, Joe Biden is also being tested by the conflict in Israel. In fact, the US is actively engaged in both parts of the world, but for the leader, in addition to the crises overseas, there is a challenging re-election campaign at home as well. Up until his Israel visit and a subsequent Oval Office address, Biden was not exactly impressing the American electorate. Biden's campaign for 2024 was being weighed down by the low approval ratings and concerns regarding fitness. In fact, 4 national polls conducted mostly or entirely after the president's initial October 10th speech, but before the Israel visit, showed approval ratings stuck between 30 and 45%. As you can see, all the surveys giving you the bigger picture and showing that a majority of American voters disapproved of Biden's presidency. Those numbers are there for you to see. Now, poll strategists also feel that even if Biden successfully steers his country through the latest global crisis, any political lift that he might enjoy could be short-lived. Perceptions of a bad economy have continued to drag down his re-election prospects, and domestic concerns have historically superseded foreign policy in American presidential contests. But it's also true that the current conflicts abroad, especially the one in Ukraine and its funding, are now also impacting America's domestic politics. So Biden's handling of the crisis could still turn the tide for the incumbent president.
Because even where we have some differences, my commitment to Israel, as you know, is ironclad. I think without Israel, there's not a Jew in the world that's secure. I think Israel is essential. And I look forward to discussing all of this with you and working together with your team to... Good afternoon, folks. I'm not introducing me, Mark is.
Let's go straight across now to political analyst and international affairs expert Stephen Golub, who's joining us on the broadcast. Thanks very much for being here. Let me begin by asking you for the factors that involve Biden's popularity ratings. To what extent do you see the Israel-Hamas war actually impacting his approval ratings? Because we saw the numbers, and the war so far has not really helped his popularity rankings.
Yeah, it's a really good question. Ironically, in terms of substantive accomplishments, both foreign and domestic policy, President Biden is probably the most accomplished president we've had since Franklin Delano Roosevelt, nearly a century ago. But you're absolutely right. He's not doing well in the polls. I'd say there are at least two factors operating there. One is his age, or the perception that he's too old to be president. He's doing a great job as president, but not a great job as a candidate. He comes across sometimes as frail, as a poor communicator. And another factor is, while inflation is coming down in the United States, people still remember lower prices from years ago, and they hold it against him that the prices aren't as low as they were a few years ago before the pandemic. Now, in terms specifically of the Middle East, it's really hard to tell. It depends how this whole war conflict, very difficult situation plays out, whether it expands. But we can say this: generally, a presidential candidate who's very pro-Israel is strengthened by the perception of their being pro-Israel. However, Biden could lose some votes on the left, particularly among younger voters who are less pro-Israel and generally more pro-Palestinian. Again, it's hard to tell exactly how that will play out until we see how the conflict itself plays out.
Indeed, and talking about his popularity rankings, can he still manage to turn the tide as far as the conflict is concerned? Like you're saying, there's a lot that remains to be seen. But what would the voters expect from him as far as his stance on the Israel-Hamas war is concerned?
Well, it depends on which voters we're talking about. But I'd say generally they want him to support Israel. If American lives start getting lost in this conflict, then that could change the dynamic. If, for example, Israel and Hezbollah escalate to a full-fledged war, which is possible, making it a two-front war, and if the United States then weighs in on Israel's side, not so much by troops on the ground, but let's say by bombing Hezbollah positions, and U.S. fighter pilots get shot down, that could conceivably change the dynamic for the worse for him politically. One thing I might add, though, is that his visit to Israel, combined with his visit to Ukraine a number of months ago, both in the middle of war or conflict situations, could actually help his campaign next year, in that he'll be able to say to people, look, I went to these conflict zones. I stood up for allies. I showed how strong I am, while Donald Trump was busy hiding national security documents in his bathroom in his estate, which is something he's actually being prosecuted for now.
Stephen Golub, thanks very much for being here on the broadcast and sharing those perspectives.
Thanks for having me.
And let's now shift focus to Pakistan. The return of Nawaz Sharif to the country has changed the face of the election battleground there. Days after the Lion of Punjab, as he's called, returned after a 4-year-long self-imposed exile. Earlier in the day, the former Pakistan Prime Minister, in fact, scored a critical legal victory when the court granted him a 2-day extension on his protective bail. Does that mean, however, that Nawaz Sharif will be able to make a political comeback? On the other hand, is this the end for Imran Khan's political career? Let's break it out all down for you. The 73-year-old leader has filed an appeal on 2 separate cases of corruption. And in July and December 2018, an accountability court had convicted Sharif in the Avonfield properties and the Al Azizia steel mills corruption cases. The PMLN Supremo's conviction resulted in a total of 17 years of imprisonment. However, Nawaz was released from jail in 2019 and was allowed to leave for London on medical grounds. And since then, Sharif was in self-imposed exile until his timely return to Pakistan on Saturday. The Islamabad High Court granted 2 more days of protective bail to Nawaz Sharif. And on being asked for any concerns on bail, Pakistan's National Accountability Board had said that they have no issues on Sharif's bail extension. The NAB also refused the need for arresting the former Pakistan Prime Minister. Interestingly, it was the same accountability board that convicted Nawaz Sharif in 2018 and sentenced him to 17 years in prison. And from the Lion of Punjab to a leader embroiled in corruption scandals, Nawaz Sharif was left with no choice 5 years ago but to ask the establishment to respect his vote.
वोट को बेवकार नहीं होने देंगे, हम वोट की खुद भी इज्जत करेंगे और दूसरों से भी इज्जत करवाएंगे।
And now, 5 years later, it seems that Pakistan's military establishment, which is the key political playmaker, has made way for Nawaz Sharif yet again. The timing of his return, however, begging the big question. Is Imran Khan the collateral damage in the process? You see, just in May this year, the former cricketer turned politician from Pakistan's PTI party was engulfed in a storm of cases. His May 9 arrest created a political storm within the party. Hundreds of his supporters and party workers took to the streets in protest and ransacked military installations. And as the ex-Pakistan Prime Minister remains in jail, Imran Khan still faces over 150 cases against him. Khan's political future may be looking bleak, but Nawaz Sharif's return has signaled a thumping return for the PMLN. What remains to be seen is if the Pakistan Army and judicial establishment will nullify all the cases against Sharif and also allow him to officially step back into the political arena. And how long before the ghost of past legal wars comes back to haunt Pakistan's leaders again?
Well, some relief there for the former Prime Minister Nawaz Sharif in 3 cases, one of which in which his bail was extended up until the 20th of November, and the other 2 in which his protective bail was extended up until the 26th of October. Now, Nawaz Sharif came to this court that is behind me, the Islamabad High Court, and his lawyers said that they would want continuity. Him coming to the court was deemed as surrender before the court. Remember, he was a proclaimed offender after the suspension of verdict, the fact that he did not come back from London. His lawyers argued that it was on medical grounds, and that then the 2-member bench, Justice Mia Gul Aurangzeb, asked the National Accountability Bureau would they be having any issues or would they want to contest the bail of Nawaz Sharif, and they said no, they would not want to which Justice Mia Gul Aurangzeb very interestingly said that he cannot really believe that it is the same National Accountability Bureau which was contesting the case earlier as well. On that, the case has now been adjourned for 2 days, and Nawaz Sharif's protective bail has been extended up until the 26th of October. Anas Malik, Islamabad, Pakistan, for WION World is One.
So the Lion of Punjab may have returned from his self-imposed exile to cheering crowds, but it's still unclear if Nawaz Sharif will be able to officially stand for elections again. And as his fate hangs in balance for another 48 hours, let's just take a closer look at the political career of Pakistan's 3-time Prime Minister. Take a look.
अगर आइन पाकिस्तान के अवाम को हुक्मरानी का हक देता है तो उनके इस हक को तस्लीम कर लो। मैं सीधी सादी बात कर रहा हूँ कि खुदारा इस मुल्क को आइन के मुताबिक चलने दो।
Toppled in a military coup, jailed, exiled.
जब आपकी तकदीर बदलेगी ना,
won elections again, became the Prime Minister. And jailed and exiled yet again. This is the story of 3-time Pakistani Prime Minister Nawaz Sharif. Born in 1949 into a wealthy family of industrialists in Lahore, Sharif rose to prominence under the patronage of military ruler Zia-ul-Haq, where he first became the finance minister. and then Chief Minister of Pakistan's second largest province of Punjab. He would hold the post for 5 years, from 1985 until elected Prime Minister in 1990, beating arch-rival Benazir Bhutto in the polls. Nawaz Sharif ascended to the helm of Pakistani politics. He served a 3-year term until he was sacked on corruption charges. 4 years later, he won a landslide 2/3 majority for his party and became the Prime Minister again. However, he would not be able to complete his tenure this time as well. But in 1998, his popularity increased manifolds after he made Pakistan a nuclear power. That too, just days after regional rivals India tested their nukes. Shortly thereafter, his government buckled under tensions with the army, which ousted Sharif and seized power in 1999. Sharif was sentenced in a military court to life imprisonment for terrorism before being allowed to go into exile in Saudi Arabia in 2000. He was permitted to return only in 2007. Back in Pakistan, he patiently bided his time in opposition. His party won about a quarter of parliamentary seats in the 2008 elections. Though tipped to win the 2013 elections, he surprised many with the scale of his victory. But in 2016, the Panama paper leaks unleashed a new threat for the Prime Minister, which resulted in claims of corruption being investigated by the Supreme Court. The allegations related to his family's ownership of apartments in an upmarket area of central London, with questions being raised over the money trail that led to the acquisition of those properties. Sharif denied any wrongdoing and called the charges politically motivated. However, in 2018, a court in Pakistan found him guilty of corruption. The court eventually sentenced him to 10 years in prison. Sharif then went to a self-imposed exile in London a year later, only to return 4 years later to a massive welcome.
Inconclusive elections have left Spain with a hung parliament. But 3 months later, an end seems to be in sight. Spain's Socialist Party and the hard-left Sumar Party have reached an agreement now to form a new government. But their potential coalition still needs to win the backing of other parties in parliament. The deal was struck after the acting Prime Minister Pedro Sanchez met with the Sumar leader and acting Labour Minister Yolanda Díaz on Monday.
Los españoles y las españolas votaron para respaldar las políticas públicas basadas en la justicia social de la última legislatura. Votaron para continuar con la senda de progreso social y un nuevo acuerdo territorial. Votamos para ganar más derechos. Votamos para ser más felices, para ser más libres.
Now, here's what the deal contains, starting with a proposal to reduce working hours while preserving the same pay. This would help reduce official working week to 37.5 hours from the current cap of 40 hours. In fact, both the parties also agreed to regulate job cuts. Spain made layoffs more flexible after a 2012 labour reform. The parties say that they will also revise the emission reduction targets upwards and push for a tax reform targeting banks and big energy companies. The agreement also includes plans to cut youth unemployment, reinforce the public healthcare system and boost public housing.
Los españoles y españolas han decidido, con su voto, que el próximo gobierno sea un gobierno de coalición progresista y de avances. 4 años más de progreso y de convivencia. Así que pongámonos en marcha. Muchas gracias y adelante.
Pedro Sanchez requires the support of Sumar's 31 lower house lawmakers to renew his term as Prime Minister. But that would not be enough. Sanchez would also require support from other parties, including those advocating for Catalan and Basque independence. And if the Socialists and the Catalan pro-independence parties fail to reach an agreement, the country will have another election in January. And in such a case, voters may hand the centre and far-right coalition an absolute majority that it narrowly missed out on in the July vote. That's all we have time for in this edition of Race to Power. This is me, Molly Gambhir, signing off. Thanks very much for watching. Stay tuned.
Israel woke up to a barrage of thousands of rockets fired from the Gaza Strip.
אזרחי ישראל, אנחנו במלחמה.
Hostilities have broken out between Israel and Palestine, and the tensions that had been gathering steam over the course of the last several weeks and months.
The siren has gone off. I don't know if you can hear in the background what's going on. I'm going into the shelter now. So it's a very, very serious situation here across Israel. It's a state of emergency.
The United States stands with Israel.
Well, we are starting this broadcast with a developing story from West Asia, where Israeli Defense Minister Yoav Gallant says Hamas has launched a war against the state of Israel.
It's easy to tell you a flat story. It's easy to show